It's hard to explain how it felt when the realization hit me. Like a slow sinking feeling that creeps up on you, and before you know it, you're drowning in it. But when the final truth settled in, I felt as though I had been holding my breath for so long that I couldn't remember how to breathe. I've always been the one to hold things together, the one who never gave up, no matter what life threw at me. Raising Lucas alone after his father passed away was no small task. I wasn't one of those mothers who sat around feeling sorry for herself. No, I had to be strong and I had to make sure that Lucas knew how loved he was. From the moment his father left us, I made a promise to myself. I would do everything in my power to give Lucas the best life I could. And I did. I worked long hours, took on extra jobs when I had to, and sacrificed countless nights of sleep to make sure we had enough. But nothing in the world could have prepared me for how it would feel when the dynamic between us started to change. I remember when he first met Clara. It felt like any other ordinary day. Lucas brought her home to meet me, and she was exactly what I expected. Confident, well-spoken, and friendly. I thought, this is it. This is the one. She seems like someone who truly cares about him. I could see the way Lucas looked at her, and for a brief moment I thought that perhaps, finally, my little boy was going to be okay. They seemed to fit together like puzzle pieces. But I should have known that something was wrong when I started noticing how much Lucas changed when she was around. At first, it wasn't obvious. He was still my Lucas, the one who called me every day to check in, the one who would joke about his childhood memories and laugh until he cried. I thought, maybe I'm just being overprotective. After all, he's growing up. It's natural that things would change. But slowly, the changes grew more apparent. There were little moments where Clara would look at me with those calculating eyes, the ones that seemed to be measuring me up, deciding where I fit into the equation of their life together. And Lucas? He didn't seem to notice. Or if he did, he didn't say anything. And that's when the cracks started to appear. It wasn't the big things, not at first. It was the little comments, the subtle hints that they had their own life now, and I was slowly being pushed out of it. Maybe we could do it this way, Clara would say, when I suggested something. Or, we don't need help, Mom, Lucas would respond when I offered to visit or bring over food. I'd laugh it off, convincing myself that this was just a phase. After all, Lucas was becoming an adult. Maybe he didn't need me as much as he used to. But that didn't mean I was ready to let go. The wedding was a turning point for me. I knew things were changing, but I didn't expect it to be so final. Lucas and Clara got engaged and immediately started planning. At first, I was thrilled. They were taking their relationship to the next level. I helped where I could, throwing my support behind every decision. I was excited for them. But then it became clear that their idea of what the wedding should be, and my idea didn't exactly line up. Clara insisted on a lavish affair, and while I wanted to contribute, it felt more like I was being asked to pay for something that didn't truly reflect the values I had tried to instill in Lucas. Still, I didn't say anything. After all, this was his day. I should just be grateful that he had found someone he wanted to spend his life with. The wedding day itself was a blur. I was proud of my son, proud of how happy he looked. But there was something off about it. I couldn't put my finger on it at the time, but looking back, I know it was that nagging feeling in my gut. The one that told me I was no longer the most important person in his life. After the wedding, I thought things would go back to normal. I was wrong. The visits became less frequent, the calls shorter, and every time I tried to talk to Lucas, there was a wall between us that hadn't been there before. He was always busy. Clara was always busy. And as the months passed, the emptiness grew. Then came the trip. It was supposed to be special, a dream vacation that I had been saving for. I had thought about it for months, planning everything meticulously. I even managed to get a great deal on tickets for us to go to the Caribbean. Just the three of us. I imagined it as the perfect opportunity to reconnect. To remind Lucas that no matter how old he got, he would always have a mother who loved him. I remember the day the tickets came in the mail. I could hardly wait to call Lucas. I was so excited. "Guess what, Lucas?" I said, my voice practically bubbling over with joy. "The tickets are here. Our vacation. It's all set." But there was a long silence on the other end. A silence that should have been a clue, that I was too eager, too excited to notice. That's great, Mom," Lucas said, his tone distant. "But Clara and we've already made other plans for that time. You know, we were thinking about doing something a bit more private." I paused, trying to process what he was saying. "But Lucas, I've been planning this for so long," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I thought we could spend time together, just the three of us. It's important." Again, there was that awkward pause. "Yeah, I know. But Clara's been wanting something a little more intimate," he said, almost apologetically. "Maybe next time, Mom." The words hit me like a punch in the gut. Next time? How many times had I put everything on hold for them? How many times had I sacrificed my own happiness for their future? And now I wasn't even invited to the trip I'd been dreaming of for months. But it didn't stop there. A few days later, when Clara and Lucas came over for dinner, I thought it would be the perfect time to discuss it. But when I brought it up, the room grew cold. Clara's smile faded, and her voice turned sharp. "We've already made our plans," she said, her eyes hard. "The trip is off the table. And honestly, I think it's better this way." My world tilted. The tickets I had paid for, the dream vacation that had been so carefully planned, were gone. The one thing I had been looking forward to, the one thing I thought could bring us back together, was taken from me. And worse, I was being told I wasn't invited. Lucas, standing beside her, didn't say a word. He didn't defend me. He didn't apologize. He just stood there, silent, as if this decision was entirely out of his hands. The man I raised, the boy I spent countless sleepless nights worrying about, had become someone I didn't even recognize. I didn't know what to say. I just stared at them, feeling that familiar ache in my chest, the one I had tried to ignore for so long. It was the feeling of loss, of being left behind. The days following that conversation felt like a blur. I didn't know how to process what had just happened. How had it come to this? How had I gone from being Lucas a world, his first phone call every morning, his source of comfort, to being someone he couldn't even stand up for? And Clara ... the woman who had entered my life with a smile and a firm handshake, now seemed to be the one pulling the strings in their relationship. It was clear that I wasn't welcome in their life anymore. Not in the way I had hoped. Not in the way I had envisioned for so long. I tried to give Lucas the benefit of the doubt, but each time I reached out, he became more distant. His responses were curt, his voice colder. The man I had raised to be compassionate, respectful, and understanding was slipping further and further away from me, and I didn't know how to stop it. Every time I tried to call, it felt like I was just a nuisance, an interruption in their perfect little world. At first, I told myself I was just being dramatic. Maybe they were just busy. Maybe I was being overbearing. After all, Lucas had a new life with Clara, and they were still adjusting to married life. But as the weeks passed, I couldn't ignore the growing emptiness. Every time they came to visit, Clara would sit in the corner, barely making eye contact with me. Her polite smiles felt more like knives, and I could see the way she subtly maneuvered. things to keep me at arm's length. The breaking point came when I was invited to dinner at their apartment. I thought this would be my chance to rebuild, to have an honest conversation with Lucas and express how hurt I was. But when I walked through the door, it was clear that the invitation wasn't meant as a warm gesture. It was a formality, an obligation. Clara greeted me with her usual tight smile, her eyes cold as ever. And Lucas ... He barely acknowledged me, his face buried in his phone, scrolling through work emails. Dinner was excruciatingly awkward. Clara tried to keep the conversation light, but every time she spoke, I could feel the walls closing in. There was no warmth in her words, no attempt to make me feel included. It was as though I was intruding on their private bubble, and I didn't belong there anymore. I tried to make small talk with Lucas, asking about his job, about life in general, but each answer was short and uninterested. He barely looked up from his plate, and when he did, it was only to glance at Clara, as though seeking her approval. It was during dessert that I finally reached my breaking point. Clara casually mentioned that she and Lucas were planning a family vacation for next year, just the two of them. "We've been talking about it for a while," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness. "Somewhere quiet, just us." The words stung, even though I had known it was coming. But what really hurt was the way Lucas looked at me when she spoke. There was no apology in his eyes, no sign of regret for what had happened. He simply nodded along, agreeing with everything Clara said, as if I were no longer a part of his life in any meaningful way. I felt the tears well up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of them. I stood up abruptly, excusing myself from the table, and made my way to the door. "Mom," Lucas called after me, his voice laced with confusion. "Where are you going?" "I can't do this anymore," I said, turning to face him. My heart felt like it was breaking all over again, but I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't pretend that everything was okay when I was being pushed out of their lives piece by piece. "You've changed, Lucas. You've changed. And I don't even recognize you anymore." The words hung in the air like a heavy cloud, and for a moment, I thought Lucas would say something. Anything. But he didn't. He just stood there, looking at me with a blank expression, as if he were waiting for me to leave. And so I did. I left their apartment that night with a broken heart, a broken spirit, and the bitter taste of rejection on my tongue. But it wasn't just Clara's influence that hurt. It was the way Lucas had allowed it to happen. It was the fact that he had chosen her over me, over the bond we had once shared. The silence in the house that night was deafening. I sat in the living room, the place where I had raised him, surrounded by memories of our better days. I could almost hear his laughter echoing through the walls, see him as a young boy, eyes full of hope, running to me with his arms wide open. I tried to hold on to those memories, but they felt so distant, so far removed from the man I had just seen. The next day, Lucas called me again. This time I didn't answer. I couldn't. I wasn't sure I could bear hearing the same empty apologies or excuses. I had reached a point where I didn't know if I could keep fighting for a relationship that was already slipping away. And yet, even as I pulled back, even as I focused on healing, I couldn't stop the thoughts that haunted me. I couldn't stop wondering what went wrong. Was it because I wasn't perfect? Because I hadn't been the mother he needed? Or had I just gotten too old, too irrelevant in his life? I thought about what Clara had said that night. How she had so easily dismissed me, as if I were nothing more than an inconvenience. But she wasn't the one who had raised him, the one who had given up everything to make sure he had a future. It wasn't her hands that had rocked him to sleep when he was sick, or her heart that had broken every time he made a mistake. was mine. And that's what made the betrayal hurt so much. The weeks that followed were a mix of numbness and anger. I began to isolate myself more, not just from Lucas and Clara, but from everyone. I didn't want to talk to friends who didn't understand, who couldn't possibly know what it felt like to be rejected by your own flesh and blood. I stopped attending family gatherings, stopped asking about their plans, stopped reaching out. Altogether, if they didn't want me in their life, then maybe it was time for me to stop trying to force myself in. But even in my isolation, the pain never stopped. It was like a constant weight on my chest, pressing down harder every day. The feeling of being replaced, of becoming irrelevant, was suffocating. And then, one day, Lucas called again. This time, there was something different in his voice, something vulnerable. And for the first time in months, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe this time, it would be different. Maybe this time, he would finally understand. But as I reached for the phone, I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear what he had to say. I wasn't sure I could bear the truth anymore. The days after that phone call were some of the hardest I had ever experienced. I found myself questioning everything, my decisions, my sacrifices, the years I had spent focused solely on raising Lucas. It felt as though I had given my heart and soul to him, and yet I was now left to pick up the pieces of my broken heart alone. The emptiness in my chest grew deeper with every passing day. But I knew something had to change. I couldn't allow myself to drown in this sorrow forever. So I made the decision to step back. It wasn't an easy choice, but it was the right one. I had spent so many years giving without ever taking time for myself. I had been the glue that held everyone together, but I had neglected the most important person in my life, me. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that it was time to focus on my own happiness, my own well-being. I started with small steps. It wasn't about making grand gestures or trying to force my way back into Lucas and Clara's life. It was about rediscovering who I was before I was anyone's mother, anyone's wife. I signed up for yoga classes. It had always been something I had wanted to try, but had never found the time for. The first session was awkward, and my body wasn't as flexible as it used to be. But something about it felt right. It was quiet, peaceful, and it gave me the space to just breathe. I felt a sense of calm I hadn't experienced in years. I also decided to redecorate my home. For years, my house had been a reflection of everything I had done for Lucas, his toys, his childhood memorabilia, everything centered around him. But now, it was time to make it my own space. I wanted a place where I could finally feel at peace. A space that belonged solely to me. I painted the walls in soft colors that made me feel calm. Bought new furniture that felt more modern and fresh. And filled the rooms with plants and artwork that spoke to my soul. It was a process, and it took time, but with each change I felt a little more like myself again. Next, I joined a book club. Books had always been my escape. A way to immerse myself in worlds where things were still right, where the characters made decisions that I could understand. I hadn't read for pleasure in so long, and when I joined that first meeting, it felt like a breath of fresh air. The women in the group were kind, funny, and passionate about the stories they read. I felt connected to something again, a community. Outside of Lucas and Clara, a group that valued me for who I was, not for what I had given them. It wasn't just about filling the void that Lucas had left behind. It was about rediscovering who I was outside of my role as a mother. I had spent so much of my life defining myself through my relationship with him, through my devotion to him. But now I had to learn to stand on my own. The first few months were difficult. The nights were the hardest. I would lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if Lucas even thought about me. I had been a constant presence in his life. For so long, but now, it seemed like I was nothing more than a passing thought. I had hoped that time would heal things, that we would find our way back to each other. But with every day that passed, that hope seemed to fade further into the distance. Then came a surprising invitation. It was from my sister Emma, who had been quietly supportive throughout this entire ordeal. She had seen what was happening, seen how broken I was, and she gently encouraged me to reconnect with the world. "You need to get out, Sophia," she had told me one afternoon over coffee. "Stop hiding. You can't heal if you stay stuck in this pain. You've worked too hard, lived too long to let it all go now." Her words stuck with me, and before I knew it, I found myself packing my bags for a solo trip to the coast. It was something I had always wanted to do, but had never done on my own. I booked a cozy little cabin by the ocean, far away from everything. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore, the salty breeze that kissed my skin. It was exactly what I needed. I spent the week walking along the beach, collecting seashells, and watching the sunset. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. I wasn't someone's mother, someone's wife, someone's caretaker. I was just me. And for the first time in years, I realized that was enough. When I returned from the trip, something inside me had shifted. I was different. The pain was still there, lingering in the background, but it no longer consumed me. I had found a new sense of purpose, a new appreciation for myself. I had learned that I could stand on my own 2 feet, that I didn't need anyone else to validate my worth. But even with this newfound strength, I couldn't ignore the fact that the rift between me and Lucas still existed. I wanted to rebuild our relationship, but I also knew that it would take time. Time for both of us to heal. Time for me to forgive him for the hurt he caused, and time for him to understand the pain he had put me through. And then, one day, Lucas called. It was unexpected, and my heart skipped a beat as I saw his name on the caller ID. I stared at the phone for a moment, unsure if I was ready to answer. What if it was just another shallow conversation? What if it was just another attempt to placate me without truly understanding the depth of the hurt? But I answered. I couldn't help it. Despite everything, he was still my son. "Mum," Lucas said, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. "I've been thinking about everything ... about how I treated you. I know I've messed up, and I'm sorry. I never should have let things get this way." I let his words sink in, feeling a mixture of relief and caution. Was this real? Or was this just another empty apology? "I know I can't fix everything right now," he continued. "But I want to try. I want to make things right between us. You're my mom, and you've always been there for me. I've been blind to that. I see that now." For a moment, I didn't say anything. I needed time to process what he was saying. The anger I had felt for so long was still there, but it wasn't consuming me anymore. I had worked too hard to heal, to find myself again, to let him completely take me down. But his apology, his sincerity, it was the first step. "I appreciate your apology, Lucas," I said finally, my voice steady. "But this is going to take time. I can't just forget everything. I need to know that this is real, and I need to know that you're not just saying these things because you feel guilty. It's going to take more than words." "I understand," he said quietly. "I'll do whatever it takes, Mom. I just want you to know that I love you. And I'm sorry." For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope, but I wasn't going to rush it. Rebuilding trust, rebuilding love, it all takes time. Over the following weeks, we began to talk more. Slowly, cautiously, we rebuilt the bridge between us. I wasn't sure how things would turn out, but I knew one thing for sure. I had learned to love myself again. to take control of my life. Whether or not Lucas and I would ever be the same, I had found a way to heal. And that was something I could never give up. In the end, I realized that the greatest love I could ever give was to myself. Because once I learned to love who I was, flaws, mistakes, and all, I was finally free to love others, including my son, in a way that was healthy, genuine, and whole.